Hi, and welcome to listen to my presentation on forecasting in tourism. My name is Juho Pesonen, and I'm the head of e-tourism research at the University of Eastern Finland. I'm also the program director for the International Master's Degree Program in Tourism Marketing and Management. Forecasting in tourism and hospitality has become one of the biggest topics during the past year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Never before has there ever been such an interest towards what will the future of tourism look like. Before the COVID pandemic, the future of tourism was quite clear. Everything was growing, the industry looked healthy and interesting, and there was not just that much requirements for forecasting. Things were smooth sailing, and there weren't any big issues. But of course, this COVID-19 changed it all. And during the past year, I've had to think more and more about forecasting in tourism and hospitality fields than ever before. I've given many television, radio, newspaper interviews, done podcasts, and many other things. And everybody wants to know, what will the future of tourism look like? And actually, in this presentation, I'm not going to predict what the future of tourism is going to look like, but I'm going to talk more about the skills and knowledge that I've learned during the past year that could provide helpful for others in thinking of forecasting in their own fields, forecasting in tourism, forecasting in hospitality, forecasting in anything basically. And what does this kind of skills and knowledge that forecasting needs are. First of all, these are basically the sources that most of my thinking experience during the past year is based on. So especially this super forecasting book, The Art and Science of Prediction, is one of the most interesting and thought-provoking books I've read around this topic of forecasting, and many of the things that I've learned and considered useful come from that book. So I definitely recommend everybody interested in forecasting to check it out. Then another book that's greatly influenced my thinking as a scientist, as a teacher, as a researcher, as a forecaster is, of course, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which basically explains how our brains function in two different ways. We have system 1 and system 2. The other one is part of brains that thinks fast without really considering things, and then the another system is more about assessing, thinking, estimating, using thinking to reach a goal. In addition to that, I've read quite a lot of papers from many tourism academic journals, reports from McKinsey and all the other big consultancy companies that are all thinking about what will the future of tourism look like, and also what it should look like. So we are seeing, for example, in the academic literature, quite a lot of let's say opinion pieces that are more stating what the researchers think the future of tourism should look like, instead of what is going to look like. And I think this is also one thing that affects forecasting, because future shouldn't be thought as given, but it is something that we definitely can influence. And these kind of papers and this kind of research is part of that influencing process, that we make the future look like a future that we want it to look like. So this presentation is divided into 3 parts. I'm talking about forecasting as a skills and a way of thinking. I'm going to present you how to apply these ideas to the case of business travel in Finland, and a little bit discussion about what lies ahead in the future of tourism and hospitality at the end. Well, first about the skills and knowledge and the ways that you have to think in order to be able to forecast what is going to happen in the future. If we look back to the beginning of 2020, when the first cases of the coronavirus became public, and it was just like a small minor detail, something happening far away in China. And when we think about all that discussion back then, now it's easy to say that how stupid these experts and predictors were back then, that how they couldn't identify what is going to happen. And that's also the case of with me, that one of my biggest mistakes for sure a year ago was that it was such difficult thing to consider how this whole pandemic would play out. There was no information about that it's even going to be a pandemic. Everybody was hushing it down, that it's not gonna come to Finland, it's not going to become a pandemic, but it did. And I think one of the things that where we went wrong, probably something that we can learn from, is that this kind of active forecasting, and maybe the forecasting that I'm talking in this presentation was not present a year ago. And that also goes for me. I remember at the beginning thinking and comparing this to 9/11, and maybe this will be even worse than 9/11, and couldn't even play around the idea that it could be such a big thing for the tourism industry. And that was because there wasn't this kind of systematic process to think about these issues. And I'm going to present this kind of a systematic process in this presentation. And we also have to remember that hindsight is always easy. Whether you are playing poker, whether you are investing in stock markets, whether you are running a tourism business, it's so easy to say that another kind of decision should have been made back then. But we always have the information we have now, but we didn't have that information back then, and that's a big difference. And that is why I think we have to first of all try to learn from the mistakes. Of course, that's one of the key things in forecasting. To improve, you have to learn from your mistakes, and maybe this video is one thing that I've learned from my own mistakes that I made when predicting how the pandemic would play out. For me, I think that forecasting is a skill, and it's a way of thinking, and both of those are things that any one of us can train and become good at. For example, as a researcher, I've come to think of knowledge as something that is constantly developing, something that is never finished. And I'm accepting, even when I'm recording this video, that the things that I'm saying here are probably there's quite many things that are incorrect, but nonetheless it doesn't matter if things are still useful. That we can never have all the knowledge in the world. All the decisions we make are always based on imperfect knowledge, and probably we are making this incorrect decisions because of that. But when we can question this and have this critical perspective on our own idea, and think that what I think about and what I believe in are only like tested hypotheses that you can test, it allows you to expand your ways of thinking. It allows you to expand your possibilities that lie ahead in the future. So instead of me predicting a year ago that the coronavirus pandemic will be something a little bit worse than or something that can be compared to 9/11, I could have generated different kind of scenarios, for example. And it's connected this forecasting systematically and through likelihoods, meaning that each of these scenarios have a certain likelihood to happen. I could have predicted that on 30%, there's a 30% chance that it will be less than 9/11, it's going to be 40% chance that it's going to be as serious as 9/11, and 30% chance to be worse than 9/11. Something around those, that not just stating one thing, but expanding on that and thinking what else could it be than what I am currently stating. And one of the issues with human mind, and something that Daniel Kahneman is talking about in his book, is that there's a lot of biases and heuristics in human brains and how we think that affect a lot what kind of forecasting results we can achieve. For example, we have loss aversion bias, that we try to minimize our losses, even though something that we could gain would be much better through its expectancy value than what we are losing. So there's great selection if you are going to examine human biases and heuristics, that our brains love to make stories. We love to connect things that we don't have any kind of reason to connect. Our brains function in a way that we like to think about things as stories, something that if one thing happens, something else happens, or this phenomenon explains why pandemic, for example, spread through the world, but we don't have the data. So that's also connected to challenging what we think and challenging our brains constantly in their ideas. And systematic forecasting means that you write things down. That allows you also to learn from your mistakes, which is of course quite important. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone makes a lot of mistakes. And it's perfectly fine. The key thing is to learn from your mistakes. If you write down your predictions, if you write down the likelihoods, over longer periods of time, you are able to assess, what did I go wrong with this prediction? Was this prediction I made correct? It has to be systematic. And another key thing is that the estimates and the likelihoods are updated as new information comes in. It's not static. The world is in constant change, and the future is for sure uncertain. But every time we receive new information about, for example, vaccines, there's new news items, new research papers coming out almost every day that are discussing how the vaccines are going to be spread among population in different countries. We are able to update our estimates. If we read the news that vaccine rollout is faster than previously thought, we have to update our estimates on, for example, that what kind of winter season in 2021-22 winter we are going to have. And with forecasting, it's always great not to go solo, not to be alone, to have someone to talk to have even bigger group of people involved in the forecasting process. In this presentation, I'm going to use an example of an online survey that shows the power of people and power of the crowds in making predictions about the future. But as you can see, all of these things are something that can be learned, and I think I've personally improved through this quite a lot in forecasting, and just understanding what forecasting requires, and understanding that it requires a lot of work. It's completely different to talk about trends, for example, that nature tourism will grow in the future. Anyone can make that kind of claims, but when we think about it in a systematic way, what does it mean? What kind of effects does it have? How can we quantify it? For example, we could make predictions for national park visitors in Finland for the next 5 years, or for the next year, for example, and in that way make the growth of nature tourism much more concrete for different tourism stakeholders. Now with all those ideas that I presented just a moment ago, we are going to look at predicting the future of business travel in Finland. I did a small social media survey around my network. I got about 85 something like that responses for this survey, and 88, and I think that was great for all the people who answered the questionnaire to think about this issue, that how will business travel in Finland develop for the next 5 years. And what I did was that I divided the respondents into two groups. The first group was just asked these 3 questions on a 0 to 100 scale, where 0 is not possible at all, 100 is certain. I asked what kind of levels business travel will be in the years to come, and what is the likelihood. For example, the experts, I have a lot of tourism experts and people in the industry in my social media circles who answered this questionnaire, thought that in 2021 it's only a 24% chance that the levels of tourism overnights because of business travel will be on 2019 levels. So very unlikely, and that's for certain. This was done in beginning of February 2021, meaning that the tourism industry had already lost basically the January, and it's very hard to catch up. So we would have to have a big rest of the year in order to reach those 2019 numbers. For 2023, the respondent thought that there's about 52% chance that the tourism will be back to 2019 levels, and even 2021 5, it was only a 63% chance. So in this way, I think that we can derive that based on these results. I would suggest that it's much more likely in 2025 to have the 2019 levels than not have those. So that would be a decision and a goal that the tourism industry could work towards too. Another thing, of course, when thinking about these kind of questions, is that we have to think that what if the question was so difficult that the respondents couldn't answer that question, but they thought answer to another question, meaning that they could have, for example, understood this question as the same as what are the levels of business travel in 2025 compared to 2019. And some people might have thought that it's about 63%. But I think in this case, the respondents got the idea and managed to answer the right question. At least the likelihoods would suggest that. And we can also look at standard deviation, which means that the bigger the standard deviation is, the bigger the differences among respondents around the mean score are. And the farther we go into the future, we see that the bigger the standard deviation becomes, meaning that people have much more difficulties predicting 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years into the future than the next year. And this is also, of course, that's how the world works. There's so many new factors coming into play the longer time period we are trying to predict, but at least now we have the numbers. The second group of respondents for that survey were given additional details before they answered the survey. I gave them information on what are the actual overnight numbers in business travel in 2020. We are seeing 45% less overnights from business travelers in 2020 than 2019. And I gave these before they answered the questionnaire and gave their estimates. And we can see that these numbers anchored the 40 people in this second group around this these 2020 results. So we see that their likelihood compared to the first group with no information, is much smaller. They understood when they were presented the numbers that the possibility to reach that kind of growth in 21 that would be required from the situation where we are at the end of 2020 is much bigger than what it was for the other group. All the respondents in this second group anchored their responses to the same information, to the same knowledge. That also means that the standard deviations in the second group are actually smaller than with the first group that didn't have a same anchoring effect. So this anchoring effect is quite important. But then if we look at later years, comparing them, it's only a little bit less likely to happen. So again, the farther we go into the future, the more difficult it becomes to predict what will happen. But nonetheless, even with these numbers, with this information, the respondents thought that it will be more likely that the business travel overnights have returned to 2019 levels in 25 than not. So good thing for the industry that at least at this point we are predicting that it will happen at some point, and it's somewhere 24 25 when the respondents were thinking it will be the same. I also had a second sample, which were a group of hotel managers, not a big group, just 31 persons, but it still provides an interesting viewpoint on forecasting, because the numbers for 2019 were much more pessimistic. I think the hotel managers knew that it's not going to happen. They were much more certain about that, and they are seeing their bookings for 2021, and they are seeing that it's not going to be as big as 2019. It's very unlikely according to their responses. But then on the other hand, we are also seeing that they are stating the return to 2019 levels on 25 much more certain than my social media networks, meaning that maybe they are more positivistic about this, or maybe they know something that the other respondents didn't know about. And we can see the same kind of phenomenons also in this hotel manager data. Of course, this is not any kind of scientific research. This is the answering, the response numbers are quite small, and there's a lot of variance in the data. So don't take this as too scientific, but still something that gives a direction and that gives an example of how we can think about future in terms of numbers, because that is important to make the right decisions. I also asked that what factors will affect business travel, and if it comes back to the 2019 levels in 23. And I got a lot of responses. So this was an open question for all of the respondents, and they gave insights into what they think are the factors that affect whether or not business travelers come back to traveling in the same numbers as in 2019. We got responses like increase in the price of travel that will affect the business travel market, flight connections, of course, if there's not that many flights anymore available, how Airbnb will be preferred during this pandemic, of course, the sustainability and remote work issues, and how the COVID-19 will develop. Will it develop new strains? Will it develop vaccines? Will we develop some kind of travel bubbles? All of these affect the likelihood of business travel returning to 2019 levels by overnight measurements. And we can start thinking about this kind of like a Fermi problem. So we have a complex problem, complex question that we don't have an answer for. But then we can start putting the answers and things that affect that answer into smaller pieces, and then we can start thinking of likelihoods or numbers, that how these will affect the numbers, overnight numbers in 23. For example, if we take 2019 level, and let's say we have a lot of data about business travel in Finland, and we know that that the business travel market is comprised of meetings, incentives, conferences, and events. If we have data about overnights regarding all of those markets, we can study each and individual market segment through these lenses and likelihoods, and see if, and define smaller pieces of this problem in order to find answers for the bigger problem. For example, that long haul conference visitors to Finland will drop by 40% in 2023 compared to 2019 levels, but the event visitors are not affected by remote work as the new standard, meaning that their numbers will be about the same. So we can start like putting bigger problems into smaller pieces and calculate from that the actual answer to this question, and even find numbers that how many business traveler for overnights there will be in 2023, if we can just account for all the factors affecting the topic. Of course, this is a big question. This is a very difficult question, affected by, as you can see, so many different factors that it is extremely difficult to think about 2023 and what kind of numbers there will be. And as you can see, forecasting is actually hard work. If done properly, if done in this way, it's not worth doing this much work on trivial matters. So each organization, destination, company needs to define what are the factors that they need to forecast in the future. What are the factors that have the biggest influence on their work? And this is the question of where to focus the resources. It's easy to say that something is a trend, but how that matters in numerical terms is as important. And one way to approach this is, for example, through scenario thinking, that when you have to make decisions, for example, that how you allocate hotel rooms, how you turn hotel rooms into long stay apartments, for example, is thinking about the scenarios. And this was a question that I presented to the hotel managers, and they had to distribute 100 likelihood points to all these scenarios together. And actually they thought that the most likely scenario in this is the third scenario, that in 2023 there is a bit less business travel than in 2019. That was about 50%. That was the most likely scenario to happen. And that kind of thinking should help you to make decisions, that this is the best kind of assessment that we have at this moment, and we have to go with that. But of course, as new information comes, we have to update these numbers. We have to measure if the third scenario is still the most likely to happen. And it's not just about the quantity, but also the numbers. And actually, these are all factors whose likelihood and whose that effect that we can calculate. And these in turn are the factors that affect actually our answers to how likely we think that business travel will return in 2019. For example, we might find new importance in business travel in a way that we don't do it for trivial things. We don't anymore do business travel for purposes where we just stay in a destination for one night, but we might prefer to have these longer travels for 1 week or 2 weeks. The length of stay of business travelers might increase. structure of the markets can change. Maybe the white collar travelers who can work from home are not going to do that much business travel, but then maybe the worker market, people for construction yards and similar, that and repair personnel and maintenance personnel and stuff like that might come to the same numbers quite fast as in 2019, and so on. So all you have to think, what are the factors that affect the likelihood of something happening. The last part is of course thinking a little bit about how to move forward from here. One question I received, that do these likelihoods even matter? That okay, let's say we've come up with a scenario, or that we've come up with likelihood that this is the most likelihood thing to happen, that we are going to make decisions based on this. And you know, something, it might be that it never comes into reality. Your scenario is not, even though you gave it 60% chances, it might be something that doesn't happen. It might be just that the odds are not in your favor, and a more unlikely scenario happens. And so do this kind of thinking has like likelihood based thinking has any kind of possibility to help us make better decisions. And I would like to think that organizations and every forecaster and everybody who is making decisions based on forecasting can benefit from this, because you always try to make decisions based on the best available knowledge. And if you do that, you've done your best, and that's everything that can be required. Of course, if something you predicted doesn't happen, you can always analyze why it didn't happen. Why was the outcome different? Did you make some kind of mistake in your forecasting process? But when we start putting different forecasting results together, that we have many different things that we are trying to forecast, and we are doing good job in that and making decisions based on those forecasts, then it starts adding up over time. So systematic forecasting over time is the key here, not just one-time forecasts, but annual, even sometimes monthly forecasts and monthly updates to forecasts is required. And companies that are able to predict and forecast the future even 2%, 5% better than the markets will gain, of course, quite a lot of competitive advantage in the over a longer periods of time. So in a way, I think this is like the best kind of mindset that I've come up with for forecasting based on my experiences during the past year. There's also a question that what about these silent signals and black swans and all of these that we are trying to that are difficult to put into numbers, is of course that well, let's take the COVID-19 pandemic for example as a example that many are thinking that it was a black swan, something that couldn't be predicted. But there's a lot of research papers and reports, and even like Finnair had in their future thinking scenario strategy this likelihood of a global pandemic already way before any of this happened. So we can think of most of the outcomes that and most of the things that would affect our business, would affect our organizations beforehand, and we can give likelihoods for those to happen. And in most cases, that's the best we can do, and that's already quite helpful thing to be able to give a real possibility for something like COVID-19 to happen. That allows your organization, even though it would be a small possibility, it would nonetheless be something that you have to take into account, that what if this happens? And it requires you to think actively and systematically about the future, collect data, use that data to make predictions. So for every organization and destination company listening to this presentation, thank you for making it so far, and hopefully it was useful for you. I would like everybody from now on maybe approach this forecasting in a bit more systematic way, and organizations, big companies, have to have a process, have to have a team, have to have people responsible for forecasting, for making sure that the management team, the board, has information and has the likelihoods of how the future will roll out at their use to make these decisions. And we can make the future, and how the future is built is based on the decisions that we make right now. And I think COVID-19 is a great example of that. So have data, have knowledge to support your decision making. You have to make predictions about how the future will roll out. Sometimes you will be wrong, sometimes you will be right, but the key thing is to learn all the time. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, you can contact me through social media or through email. Thanks and kiitos.